Hello everyone, welcome to astrologynewsreport.com. Today is January 19th, 2013.
Presenting an alternate view of world events as seen through the lens of Vedic astrology.
I'm Ron Berger.
And I'm David Anton Savage. Let's take a look at the week that was.
In last week's show, we pointed out how Mars, transiting in Virgo, was going to exactly conjunct the USA natal Saturn at 24 degrees Virgo. Since Saturn is security and stability, and Mars is the attack planet, this could be interpreted as an attack on U.S. security.
Well, last week, President Obama gave his long-awaited big speech on the National Security Agency, which has been under fire quite a bit over the past year due to the tasty revelations provided by Edward Snowden.
One of the significations of the combat planet Mars is that it creates controversy, and the topic is controversy about the country's security and how that security is to be maintained.
And at what cost? That all of our private communication data needs to be saved for what? Maybe we should change the name to the National Spying Agency. Here's another bombshell from Mr. Snowden that surfaced last week. The NSA has been collecting over 200 million text messages every day from around the world.
Yeah, so the question that the Mars transit brings up is the controversy about how much control, that's Saturn, planet of control, do we want the government, that's the 10th house of the USA chart, to have over us in the name of security. That's Saturn again.
And isn't all this just a question of values yet again? The planet of values, Venus, is retrograde and transiting in the USA's first house, where this past week it was receiving the exact square aspect of Mars, and the USA is currently in a Venus subperiod.
Okay.
Yes. Well, Jupiter, planet of morals and the significator of the guru, is opposing Venus, the planet of values. Last week, the Pope gave his annual speech on world crisis. One major topic was abortion. Pope Francis equated discarding human life to our throwaway culture. It's modern society's value system, in this case the lack of value for the fetus, being opposed by the Pope, who is, after all, the guru for the Catholic Church.
Okay. Another manifestation of Venus retrograde periods is that you have to be careful you get real value for the cost. The Iran nuclear development deal goes into effect on January 20th. Over $500 million of Iranian funds held by foreign banks will be released in exchange for what? A promise that Iran will not enrich uranium past 5%, which is well below the threshold needed for producing nuclear weapons. The inspection team in charge of seeing that this happens already admits guaranteeing full compliance will be a near impossible task.
And in case there was any doubt about who got the better end of the deal, Iran's president, Hassan Rouhani, bragged in a recent tweet that this shows how, and we quote, "world powers have surrendered to Iranian nation's will."
Okay. The head negotiator for the Iranians even admitted that it would only take Iran 1 day to resume enriching uranium to the 20% level. That is to say, weapons grade.
Wow, that is very fast indeed.
Yeah, and shows just really, how effective is this whole thing anyway. All right, in another area of the zodiac, Mars, while in Virgo, is still opposite Uranus, pitting the planet of conflict against the planet of freedom. And in the ongoing rebellions category, the anti-government protests in Thailand took another turn last week when thousands of demonstrators blocked major streets in downtown Bangkok in a deliberate attempt to paralyze the city. The army is responding with force. Shots were fired, and yet the protesters show no signs of backing down.
Meanwhile, in Mexico, rural inhabitants of the state of Michoacan, fed up with the government's inability to control the drug cartels, have taken matters into their own hands and formed vigilante groups, and have been going after the drug gangs on their own. But having armed vigilante groups taking control of the countryside made the federal government upset. So they sent in the military, who are now actively suppressing the vigilante groups. And so we now have the Mexican government in the position of helping out the drug cartels. Something is wrong with this picture.
And in another case of violent insurrection, the situation in Iraq continues to deteriorate, with al-Qaeda loyalists pursuing a relentless campaign of attacks mostly aimed at security forces, Shiite civilians, and Sunnis seen as loyal to the Shiite-led government. January has become one of the bloodiest months since U.S. combat troops left 2 years ago.
And the terrible truth is, there's more to say in this department, like Afghanistan, but I think the audience got the astrological point already.
Right. All right, Jupiter retrograde is the planet of wisdom, going back over the past, which means learning from the past. The Republicans learned something from the public's intense disapproval of their government shutdown of last October. The low polls evidently did make an impression. Last week, both the Senate and the House finalized a $1.1 trillion budget, which they voted on and passed. Of course, it only funds the government until September, and then the whole circus begins again.
And I might add that, as we mentioned a couple weeks ago, Mercury transiting in Capricorn is the planet of decisions in the sign of practical reality.
Which is a good thing, even if it's only temporary.
Yes. Well, here's our marquee moment for you, Ron. Jupiter is the planet of courts and judges. Venus's value, in a classic exposition of the two great benefics opposite each other, and both retrograde, a federal district judge has disallowed the financial settlement being filed by the NFL to compensate retired football players for various brain maladies that are most likely due to playing such a violent sport. The judge found the $765 million settlement to be too small, since up to 20,000 former NFL football players could potentially qualify for payments.
The Jupiter as judges versus Venus as values pattern manifested in other ways, too. A couple of weeks ago, it was the courts ruling against the marriage values of the state of Utah. And then last week, a federal judge struck down Oklahoma's state constitution's amendment prohibiting same-sex marriage as violating the U.S. Constitution's guarantee of equal protection.
And Venus is the planet of marriage, so it's Jupiter, the courts versus traditional marriage values.
Another big judgment last week was the Federal Court of Appeals deciding against the FCC regulations that maintain net neutrality for the Internet. The judgment means that the Internet service providers will now be able to play favorites, making some sites more available than others, and selling the access to the highest bidder.
Gee, sounds like crony vulture capitalism at work to me.
Yes, David, as brutal as ever. And with that, we conclude this week's Review of the Week. Be sure to click in with us next week.